As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
One of the worst performances of my career, and they never doubted it for a second.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble.
You just gotta keep living, man. Livin.
Son of a bitch. He stole my life.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Welcome back to the Shot by Shot podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing one of the greatest filmmakers of all time who we have not yet discussed on this podcast, and that is the one and only Alfred Hitchcock with his masterpiece, Rear Window. And maybe some of you listening have seen it, maybe you haven't, but if you have not seen it, we think this is a film you totally should check out. If you're someone who's looking to get into some older films, or maybe even if you have no interest in checking out an older film, this is definitely one of the ones that I think is the perfect gateway into classic cinema, 1950s cinema. It's in beautiful Technicolor, so you don't really have to deal with the black and white barrier. If maybe you're someone who is hesitant to watch a black and white movie, this is in very bright and bold color, not like the typical black and white movie you probably associate the 50s with. And it's truly just such a great entry film into older films because it really holds up today for so many reasons, and we're going to get into everything today. We're going to break down all of it for you, the filmmaking, the story, the love story underneath the suspense, how Hitchcock creates that suspense, and also a lot of the themes of voyeurism and the themes of how the film at its core really is a reflection of watching a movie and really puts us, is commenting on the experience of watching a movie. And I think it's so relevant today when you even connect it to things like social media and the desire to look into the lives of other people. This film Hitchcock was so ahead of his time in so many ways, but this film is so ahead of its time in its themes as well. I think it's more made for today, you could argue, than it is made for the era of its time. Yeah, there's just so much we have to talk about. But before we get into it, Oscar, what are your thoughts on Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window?
Yeah, this is a film that I absolutely love. It's my all-time favorite list. For me, this is his best film. Just kind of, obviously he's known for being the master of suspense, but I think this just takes the crown of everything he's done. For me, he peaked in 1954 with this and Dial M for Murder, both releasing in the same year, and for me, his two best films. This film is like such a perfect example of how to manipulate an audience through kind of POV and frame within a frame. It's textbook. You just don't get any better than this film. I think what you were saying, Alex, about the themes being more irrelevant now than they were then, but I still think then they were just ridiculously relevant. There's so much on surveillance and paranoia, specifically big in the 1950s, which I'll get into later. But yeah, I think there's such an ambiguous sense in this film, like you don't really know who's right or wrong, because like I said, Hitchcock, master of suspense, and then kind of it all comes kind of crashing down. But even then, I still think there's a lot of ambiguity to it. But yeah, I think this film is absolutely incredible, and this had my second watch today. Just so good.
For sure. Yeah, this is definitely my favourite Hitchcock as well. It's kind of really just a masterpiece of everything that makes Hitchcock brilliant, really. It employs a lot of his characteristic techniques and like the tropes that come along with his filmography into this like perfect package that explores like voyeurism, relationships, all through this James Stewart character, who's already my favourite actor of all time, so I love him in this, as well as Grace Kelly, who is the quintessential Hitchcock blonde, starring in many of his best with Dial M for Murder, like you said, and To Catch a Thief. It's pretty much everything that you could ask for from a Hitchcock, and it's undoubtedly one of the best films ever made. And like Alex was saying, this is great for anybody that's not into older films, and this is my go-to recommendation for people that want to get into them. It's not only one that's like one of Hitchcock's masterpieces, but it's like one that's utilizing his one location like he did in Rope. It's to make everything it's quite a simple film, but very complex as well. So it's very accessible for somebody that's not familiar with maybe films from the 50s. And it's also Hitchcock at his funniest. Like, beginning as a silent movie director, he's rooted in visual storytelling. So this is full of visual gags, slapstick moments. It's just, there's so many laughs here. on top of James Stewart being hilarious, as he always is in pretty much every film that he's in. It's a film that's also just insanely influential. Like, it's a film that started its own genre pretty much. The mystery of people observing through windows. I mean, there's films like Fright Night, The Conversation, Sisters, or even just any film that like fundamentally uses voyeurism. Like, no matter what they do, they're borrowing from Hitchcock. Most notably, probably De Palma, who's notorious for taking influences from Hitchcock, employs voyeurism in many of his films throughout his career, almost copying Rear Window in the first half of Body Double. Like, all of Hitchcock's films are like greatly influential, but this one's like almost unmeasurable influence on kind of modern cinema. So I think that's why this is definitely just one of the best films ever made.
Yeah, revisiting this, this was really one of my introduction films into the 1950s. I saw this like before I ever really studied film, and I was just more just as a fan, just trying to get into older films and explore what's out there. And yeah, so this was like one of my, I think I had seen, I don't think it was my first Hitchcock, but I think it was definitely one of the first two or three. And well, probably actually maybe it was, but this was definitely one of my introductions into Alfred Hitchcock as a director and just 1950s films as a whole. And it just revisiting it recently really made me very nostalgic for like just that first like exploring olds, because now I've seen hundreds of films from the 50s and just exploring older films. And back then where I didn't know a fraction of what I know now. I didn't know a fraction of the filmmakers that I know now. And back then I saw Hitchcock as like when I first went to film school, like Hitchcock was like his word was law. Like he was one of my absolute filmmaking idols at the time. And like his approach and philosophies on filmmaking, I took very seriously at that time. Like he was right about everything. Like it was Hitchcock and Scorsese. Those were like the ultimate like masters of cinema. And I feel like I'm constantly reminded now when I revisit his films how much I underplay my own influence from him. Like when I look at especially my early experimental projects or pretty much everything I've done, like I don't really often credit Hitchcock as one of my favorite filmmakers. When I say the filmmakers who had the most influence on me, it's always Fellini, Scorsese, Carwai, Leone, and then a couple other names I bring up as well. But I really undercredit Hitchcock and the influence he's had on me. And I think a lot of that's because when you start watching his films, they can tend to get a bit repetitive at times. Like his style mostly is the same for most of his career. He remakes his own films a lot, and I think he can feel a bit repetitive. But then when I see films like this, I'm just reminded of just his brilliance and why, even though his style is, I guess you could say, a bit repetitive, it's still there's so much value in each one of his films because I think great filmmakers, for the most part, are very precise, and Hitchcock is just as precise of a filmmaker as you can be. He's so detailed in every area, and even though his style can get repetitive, he's one of the most experimental filmmakers, not just of all time, but in America. Like normally, most of the great experimental filmmakers were overseas, or when you get into more recent films, like low-budget independent films. But Hitchcock was a big-name studio director doing experimental things, and even though his style got repetitive, he was always experimenting with taking certain tools away from himself. One of his most trademark techniques has always been his editing. And in Rope, he takes that away from himself. He knows the value of a film score with some of the best director-composer collaborations ever with Bernard Herrmann. And in The Birds, he takes that away from himself. And here, he takes away his ability to move the camera outside of one location and really just traps us in this one location, is always really experimenting with taking these things away from himself to see what he can do and how he can tell a story in those ways, in new ways. And although everyone says Hitchcock, the master of suspense, in my opinion, even more so than that, he's the master of point of view. I think his number one defining quality is his use of point of view with what they call the Kuleshov effect, where he describes it as you see someone, he looks, he smiles. Now, if you cut in between a picture of a baby, you think, oh, he's a nice, like gentle, like sentimental person. And if you swap that same image of the baby for a picture of a girl in a bikini, you think, all right, now he's perverted. So the same exact image can have a different effect on you based on the image that you place around it. And I think this is such a core part of Hitchcock's entire filmography is you see someone, he cuts to something, and then you see the reaction. That's pretty much his standard playbook for most of his filmmaking. And I think Rear Window, he leaned into that to its absolute fullest effect, where it's literally a film about someone watching, but a filmmaker who, Hitchcock wasn't seen as an art or like acclaimed filmmaker at the time. He was seen as like just a mindless entertainer. And one of the first filmmakers to really show everyone what an artist he was underneath the entertainment was Francois Truffaut, who was a leader of the French New Wave, which made people conscious of that they were watching a movie. But you really see that in Rear Window. Hitchcock is doing a lot of what they were doing in the French New Wave in 1954 Hollywood studio system with making us aware of the craft. And I think just one of the most interesting parts of it is how everything about this movie is truly a commentary on watching a movie or watching TV. You see the different people, that's like a different station on TV. It really plays a lot on our desires for adventure, our interest in dark subject matter and murder and crime, which is a huge part of Hitchcock's entire voice as an artist. And, our desire for whether it's adventure or heartbreak or things that we're protected from by watching it on the screen, just like Jimmy Stewart's character is protected from watching from a distance rather than being an active participant necessarily in what's going on in the film.
The amount of experimentation that's going on here is crazy. I think the most impressive experiment that he does in the film is the score. The score is completely diegetic in this film. The score that we hear is a score that's actually being played in nearby kind of apartments and things around. And I love how the set and the production of this film, it just completely comes to life. And the set is unbelievable. It really, really is. That kind of the technicolor skies, you get that one shot where they're sitting on the windowsill as the sky's orange in the background. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, but the production is absolutely insane. And I think that kind of everything just goes in hand in this kind of experimental kind of fashion. And I think the directional timing of everything from the score that's playing is so perfect in this film. And Alex, like you were saying, kind of how this film is kind of a reflection. I think there's so many parts of this film just reflect upon itself and what's happening with Jimmy Stewart's character. You kind of all the other apartments that we see that aren't the guy that is the main focus of the story is kind of reflecting on his character and his relationships around him. And I think it's really, really beautiful kind of once you break down that. But yeah, the sets are it's absolutely nuts. It's genuinely crazy. I'm pretty sure it's just one set as well, from what I've heard, just the entire thing. But yeah, the experimental nature that a lot of people don't realize in this film, especially the score, is incredible.
I mean, it's even experimental for today, never mind the 50s. I don't think anybody would have the confidence to do something like he does at the end, where he's making the screen flash orange, and it's very a very different way of fighting the kind of villain that comes into his home. It's still very experimental. I also love that shot that you mentioned, the two shot of him and of Jeff and Lisa sit in front of the window and the sunset behind them. It's so good. I love the set so much, just how everything's physical and you could really go there. And it just one-ups what he was doing in Rope, where it was like Alex was saying, that was a one shot in one location, but he ups that with going back to editing after that film, and still incorporating this giant set that's all it's almost like a stage play, but it all still looks realistic, and it's all physical, and there's other people going about, and the frames within frames just everywhere, and that Technicolor is all the colors pop. It's so gorgeous. It's an incredible looking film. The cinematography is incredible. The blocking is phenomenal. The way he just moves around the room with such elegance, the way he moves around the room, even in these dialogue scenes where there's such precision, the way they move around the room and just making these normal shots look great, visually telling us about the characters. I think even often something that is overlooked when people go back to these older movies and they think, why are they like looked at as these masterpieces compared to like contemporary movies? And it's even moments like this where like the mastery of someone like Hitchcock comes through, where it's seemingly like more unimportant, just talking scenes, but there's so much care and precision in every single shot, and everything matters, every decision matters. Yeah, just every frame is just, there's a reason behind it, and that's the brilliance behind Hitchcock and his like visual storytelling, which is just why he is like one of the greatest directors of all time.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that a lot of people will look at these films like Rear Window or Sunset Boulevard, whatever it might be, and say like, why does this movie have a 4+ average on Letterboxd? Why does it have such a high Rotten Tomatoes score? Like, and they, in their mind, it might not have the polish of a today movie. I wouldn't even call it that. I would say as much as it's just such a different style from what people have seen, which is why I think that film history should be done backwards, because it's just such a big jump if you go from a 2020 film to a 1950 film, where I think it's the best way to explore film history is to go kind of backwards decade by decade. But that's exactly what we're going to do in this episode, is really show you why this film is so acclaimed and appreciated, and why it gets so much praise despite being like an older movie. And I think that a lot of people who watch it might not catch all of these precise details that Hitchcock was such a craftsman at, along with might not fully understand just how relevant it is to their own lives in the world today. And I think that, you know, one of the most interesting things that totally is relevant today is Hitchcock said, like, for the start, what's Jimmy Stewart's motive at the end of the day for being a peeping Tom? The character Stella even says we become a nation of peeping Toms. In the 50s, she said that, which today obviously is 1,000 times worse. But, you know, it's, what is his motivation at the end of the day? Like, yes, he's of course like solving a murder case, but why is he is, it's, at the end of the day, it really isn't any of his business looking into people's windows and stuff like that.
He's bored.
Exact, you hit the nail on that. It's exactly what his motive is. He's bored. That's like, it's not like a justifiable motivation in terms of like the way most screenwriters would approach it, but like he's literally just bored and curious. And is that like a morality type of motivation that's most screenwriters are going to think is going to really win the audience over? Like, no, they're going to say in a lot of writers' rooms, we need more of a something to win the audience over. We need stakes, all this stuff. But like most people are just going to look out their window just because they're bored. He's in a wheelchair and he's bored, and that's enough of a motivation for the majority of people. And Hitchcock said it best with 9 out of 10 people, if they look across and see something, they will stay and look. They won't turn away and say that's none of my business, which I think is very true. And I think a lot of what movies and TV are essentially for a lot of people is looking into other people's lives. And, you know, this is an era before social media. This is before reality TV. This is before a lot of just how, this is before the whole, like, I'm sure celebrity like tabloids existed, but not to the degree they do today. And I think he was so ahead of its time in this desire to look into other people's lives, and not only that, but project their own lives onto other people. And whether it's characters in a movie in real life, or Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly projecting their feelings, whether it's towards marriage or something else, onto their neighbors. And I think this is where like his point of view use is so incredible, where, you know, Hitchcock even measured the height of his actors for the POV to be just perfect and always immerse you in that point of view. And he believed that this was his best point of view use. And it's literally an entire movie where not much is happening actively. It's all about someone watching and reacting to things. And when you think about it, that's really what all of us are doing when we step into a movie theater, is we're just watching. And, you know, there's things like not everyone's interested in the same things. Hitchcock has always been fascinated with crime and like the crime from the most normal situations and the most normal seeming people having these dark crimes underneath. And a character like Stella is more interested in romantic heartbreak, the same way some people are more interested in, you know, melodramas and, you know, like romantic dramas, whatever those might be, like soap operas, the word I was looking for. And So Stella, she doesn't go and look at Thorwald while we're in the middle of an action, things going on with him. She looks down at Miss Lonely Heart and is more interested in her heartbreak. And I think humans are very fascinated in dangerous things or things we don't want to think or feel that we're safe from. And there is this barrier of safety for most of the film from what we're seeing. The same way when you step into a movie theater, you're safe from the actual danger that's going on screen. And I think Hitchcock's really calling that out here. And then ultimately, in the end, though, we eventually are called out for it directly with the way he breaks the fourth wall. And like I said, Francois Truffaut and the French New Wave were famous for really breaking the fourth wall, where the actor looks directly at us in the audience. They look directly into the camera, staring at us, the audience, which was a big, like, no, do not break that rule in classic Hollywood. And once the French New Wave really became pioneers of it, but this was, 5 years before the 400 Blows, and Hitchcock was still breaking the fourth wall and making us conscious of the fact that we're watching a movie before the French New Wave was even a thing. And he does it for the first time with the Newlyweds, and it's really sudden and brief. It's easy to miss. It doesn't startle us too much, where the Newlyweds, it's from a distance, so she looks at us and they shut the curtains. Whereas it becomes a very earned fourth wall break, where he's breaking the rule, but like it's earned by the time we get there, where Thorwald finally looks at us before he comes over to Jimmy Stewart's apartment, where this is now with a long lens. It's really tight. We're close up on his face, and now he looks directly at us, calling, and the barrier of safety has been broken. And this is before he comes over, and the danger becomes present for Jimmy Stewart. And I think this is, like I already mentioned, just whether it's reality TV or the lives of these social media influencers, there's this constant desire that's, I guess, an innate human desire to look into other people's lives and fascinations with things we don't want to experience, where we have a safety from them and get to watch other people experience them.
That is the brilliance of it as well. I think the whole situation is that he is playing with like that evil under like normal Americana, like you said, like where there's these normal looking people doing their gardens, just going around their daily lives, but there's these dark mysteries underneath. And he plays with that brilliantly, like with the actual murder of the film. But like even the Newlyweds, like the couple that we don't really ever see, like there could be something dark going on like behind that. Like we just get the subjective view of Jeff. We don't really get to see what's going on there. And just really the brilliance of the situation that is that you are the observer, like you're saying, like nobody outside the window ever interacts with him, at least for the most of the film, even though we do venture outside of it sometimes, outside of the hiding place, through like when Lisa breaks into the apartment or when the dog is killed, which almost frees the camera. We go like for like about a minute, we leave almost Jeff's POV, we get some close-ups to the neighbors going around the courtyard bits that we hadn't seen. But eventually when they go back to their homes, we go back to Jeff's POV and we're stuck back in that until that moment that you were saying, where Thorwald locks eyes with you in the POV of Jeff's camera, and suddenly his hiding place is exposed, and that suspense is created of him entering the space, and it's now real now because like somebody else is invading into his space, and it's one of the few moments where the audience knows more than Jeff, and this is how he creates the suspense. This is the brilliance of this movie.
Yeah, it's so great. There's we kind of get some of the POV shots, obviously, kind of at the beginning. They're kind of differences because with the binoculars, we get those kind of like the blacked out edges of the frame, like the circular. They're kind of art in the beginning, kind of the difference between just him with his eyes and him with his binoculars or camera. I think that's done really, really well, and I like it how. Kind of as we're kind of going along, like some of the pans as we're kind of moving across, trying to find something, trying to pinpoint something, they slowly get quicker and quicker. Kind of he's getting just so bored and he's just trying to find something out there. And I kind of some particular shots reminded me of a Dolce Vita with that scene where we get that POV switch. We get kind of that in this, where kind of we're in that POV shot, he's looking out and it kind of zooms back out again, and we're in the apartment, but it's not from that kind of POV, and it works so brilliantly. And kind of I kind of touched on it in my intro. This is so obviously so relevant now, but even more relevant in the 1950s with how paranoid everyone was. You're in 1950s America in the middle of the Cold War, and your neighbor could have been like a communist spy. And I think that's what the biggest thing is trying to say at the time for the film. Is like you were saying, the neighbor's just like a complete unknown person for you. They could be someone completely different. I think that's the biggest purpose it serves for its time. And I think I love the kind of use of the dialogue in those kind of observational scenes. Like we can hear them speak, but we can't hear what they're saying at all. It's just kind of mumbled words for us. And I love how just Hitchcock's use of just letting the image speak in this, and the camera as well. Kind of that kind of similarities between the observation and the conversational scenes. We're kind of got those kind of long tracking shots when we're inside, just following the camera, when the actor's just moving around the room, just wherever they're going. Especially with kind of when Grace Kelly's there, the camera's just, it's not cutting at all. We're not kind of zooming a lot. But I think that's what makes those kind of the zoom scenes so good, because you kind of get this moment of realizations. I think we get a couple of them where just camera just really moves in on the face, and they happen just so rarely that you just know something is up, and you just get that instant feeling as soon as it happens, and it's so well executed. And through this kind of point of view with like frame within a frame, we get like a lot of tension created. I love how as you kind of go on, we get like windows will close, lights will go on and off, and our eyes like forced into one spot in kind of one exact location within the frame. And it works so well. Like windows are blinds are drawn. Sometimes we'll get like a 3 out of 4 lights will be on some of the flats in the apartments, and it just Hitchcock just trying to guide our eyes, but and trying to move us away as well. And it really does work brilliantly. But I think for me, the most impressive thing that Hitchcock does with the camera is like the opening scene. I hate exposition when it's just shoved in our face. And the opening scene, no dialogue. We get all the information we need to know. We're panning around the woman in one shot. We get the name of the character on the cast of the leg. We get the physical state of the man. We see a car crash photo, and we see negative images of his girlfriend. All we need to know about the character, done. No dialogue at all. Absolutely perfectly executed, that opening scene.
And it introduces to all of the neighbors as well. It's so brilliant, that first pan at the start. Just visual storytelling at its finest, really. Like you said, that it introduces you perfectly to the character. That it's in a heat wave. It does so much in that one pan, and there's that like anti-clockwise pan across the courtyard. Yeah, it's not a film that fills you with exposition on the neighbors or our protagonist's life or the murder, which a lesser director would have done. But Hitchcock keeps you in this like active participation in the mystery by expressing everything visually, and it really keeps you in the subjective shoes of Jeff, which is so brilliant, like you said.
Yeah, Hitchcock, he coins the term that I use like very, very. It's one of the terms I use the most, especially when studying film. Like it's literally like a note point that I write frequently, and I'm always looking for, and that's pure cinema. Which what he means by that is when you can mute the film and still understand what's going on. And he was someone who really was never happy about the transition into sound films. And I think it's one of his biggest strengths as a storyteller and a filmmaker is his commitment to the image and commitment to making sure that if you watch a Hitchcock film muted, you'll still understand everything. You'll still feel the thrill of the experience. Of course, he really was a true pioneer of using sound in film, and his use of sound to help tell the stories and immerse you in the experience is some of the most influential and kind of groundbreaking on that area in film history. But still, his commitment always was first and foremost to the image. And I think that's one of my favorite things about him as a filmmaker. I totally agree with Oscar. That opening pan where the exposition is all visual, it's not never spoken exposition, is such a strength to the film. He's able to introduce and communicate everything to us visually with an unmotivated camera move, which a lot of directors are more hesitant to use, but there's nothing motivating the camera there. It's just moving around at our convenience to show us everything. And I find it funny that people think like, oh, it's not plausible for the camera. Like, why would the camera be moving here? It's unmotivated just for the exposition. And then we'll create a dialogue situation that totally is not plausible just for the sake of exposition. So like, if you're going to kind of cheat the realism or whatever you might call it, do it the visual way. Don't do it in the dialogue way. And I think that kind of camera moving around to different pieces of visual information is definitely a trademark of his. He uses it in Psycho as well, which is one of the more well-known ones. And I think that's such a strength to him as a storyteller. I think that when I first watched this film, the first half, I'm not going to lie, I wasn't totally locked in on. Like, it was very dialogue heavy. I know Ryan praised the blocking, and I think there are some really good moments of blocking, but I do think one of my only criticisms of the film is that I do think he kind of does stop and just like basic coverage a little too much in the first half, where, you know, a filmmaker like John Huston typically will shoot those in a long take where the blocking's constantly changing. And there are moments he does that, and I think those are great. I think he does shoot a little bit of like edited coverage for dialogue scenes a bit too much, which can make it feel a bit stale at times or dull. But once we get to that third act and Hitchcock, now at the third act, we're fully committed. The audience, you don't need to worry about winning the audience over anymore or giving them information that they need or teaching them who the characters are. We know all of this by now. And now that Hitchcock gotten all of that out of the way, he can just deliver us one of the greatest third acts in film history, where it now becomes a silent movie essentially. And there's so much to be said about the way he creates dramatic irony, the way he uses different areas of the frame, the way he manipulates our information and makes us participants, makes us insiders, because he was one of the best ever at making the audience participants. But what it really is, that third act, is we are watching essentially a silent movie by then. It's truly like something almost out of like a Buster Keaton movie at times. And I think that's such a strength to leaving the audience with such a moving experience and such a thrilling experience is that third act. It was one of the most, like I said, I didn't love the first half when I first watched it. I was kind of thinking like, all right, like, it's not a bad movie, but like, is this really as great as they say it is? Keep in mind, I wasn't schooled on 1950s movies at the time either. And when that third act is the first time I watched it, one of the most immersed in a film I've ever been. And I think once he's kind of gotten everything out of the way in terms of like the exposition he needs, all of that, then he can just fully be the silent filmmaker that he at his core wants to be. And I think that's when Hitchcock's at his best.
Yeah, funny that you mentioned Buster Keaton, because I was thinking about him with the physical comedy as well, like when Miss Torso's like dancing across from the courtyard, or when the couple was like falling over carrying the mattress. It's very edging on like slapstick comedy that like Buster Keaton would have done in his movies. That really reminded me of moments like him. Yeah, just that ending is so brilliant, and I think it kind of blends in all of the kind of subplots that it creates so well into the final like scene of the movie, or after the showdown where he falls. Like, we have all the neighbors, like all their different subplots kind of coming together. Like the composer on the right, he's wrote a new song with the Mrs. Lonely Hearts in the apartment with him. Like, the couple up the top have a new dog. Mrs. Torso welcomes her husband home from the army, and that new couple still look a bit unhappy. But then we have the final shots of Jeff and Lisa, with his two broken legs, seemingly looking happy with their new situation. But all these like small subplots laced throughout the film, they all come together and wrap up perfectly to make that kind of like final moment in the film. And I think I love the ending so much because it's just that final pan around the courtyard, from the repetition from the start of the film.
Yeah, like I was mentioning before about the diegetic music, the script diegetic score that's in this film. The only time the score is non-diegetic is at the beginning and the ending of this film, which works brilliantly because they are very kind of paralleled endings and beginnings. Sorry, but particularly on that last act, it's crazy. Like, as soon as the guy walks into the thing, there's just such an overwhelming sense of like personal invasion, and that's just specifically down to the POV and how long we've kind of sat with this character in his room, because we're just so used to looking from afar and having kind of no one kind of unknown to us, like come near to us from our perspective that we're seeing. And yeah, it's so tense, and just the lighting on like all their faces, like when he kind of goes back against the wall and you can't see his face, and when the guy steps through the door, is the same as well. And then he kind of walks into the light slightly, and you get that close up. You can just see like the center of his face and his eyes. Really, it looks absolutely incredible. But yeah, with kind of that, I think there's some like nice like directional changes when he walks in as well, or nearer to walking, and we get that kind of almost like behind over the shoulder shot of like kind of a Jimmy Stewart looking backwards like that is really, really nice. And I like it when we get kind of in films like these kind of moments, like directors, we just get kind of new and certain shots that we just haven't seen so far this film, and it gives you that instant feeling that something is slightly off. But yeah, those bulb flashes are crazy. That's the fading orange is brilliant. It's so good.
Yeah, it's really interesting how he only uses the score at the start. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's just a start, and then there's a lot of diegetic sounds, like you said, coming from the courtyard or just outside the window, and he uses the sounds like so well, like transitioning the scenes. Like often he'll like start off like introducing the next scene with like a song that's coming out from the street. There's like moments where it's really like drastically changing the scene, where there's like a dog barking, or when the dog is digging up the garden, or when the dog's killed, and you just hear the scream, and he like rapidly like, runs to the window. And the use of the composer to the right, I think his like development of his song is almost really good as a score, a diegetic score, like that they can actually hear. Like we see him off starting a song at the start, slowly developing throughout the film as we kind of like hear him develop it in the background. And I feel like that's maybe why Hitchcock's cameo was in the department with him, because he's like the two artists like making their own masterpiece like together as like the film develops. But yeah, eventually at the end we hear like the completed version of that, and he saves the life of Mrs. Lonely Hearts. So it all comes around together to actually mean something. It's not just something that's happening randomly in the background.
Well, I think one thing most people don't know about this is that Bernard Herrmann did not work on this film. This is before he ever collaborated with Herrmann. He worked with composer Franz Waxman, who was a Paramount composer. He did like Sunset Boulevard for Billy Wilder. And so I think this is, of course, it's not like a orchestral traditional sounding score or something like traditional that you would hear. It's very simple, and it's really about the music kind of coming together for that final Lisa piece. But I like how, like you both mentioned, he makes it diegetic, and I think we really see the power of music here and how it's able to save Lonely Heart from killing herself. We really see kind of the power of the music there. As for sound, the sound effects were recorded live in the real world, and also was recording them at a distance. And they really didn't have the technology to make recording at a distance as sharp. So it was a very bold decision that was frowned upon. But Hitchcock wanted the sounds to be bouncing off of different skyscrapers and buildings like they would in real life. And so this is also one of the first to ever, even though most people are not going to notice this unless you're told it, it's one of the first ever to really use sound effects that were recorded live and actually recorded at a distance. And his precision to where he uses them, especially in that suspense sequence at the end, where things like the anticipation of approaching movement that Hitchcock and the suspense of footsteps was, of course, a Hitchcock trademark. And then so precise, was one of the first to really use calculated sound. It's never just like, so many films today are just like a clusterfuck of sounds. Like it's just a bunch of sounds, or it's just all about, okay, what would you realistically hear? But Hitchcock, it's always only a few sounds. It's always like just 2 or 3 sounds at most that are so precise to kind of create an emotional response. Once again, it's all about the emotional response rather than realism. His films were criticized a lot for not being plausible all the time, and that's because he always cared about what's the best to affect the audience emotionally rather than the standard realistic option. And I think that, it's things like you see Jimmy Stewart look across at Thornwald, and for him, we hear like steamships. Then we cut back to Jimmy Stewart's reaction. We hear sirens. It's always reflecting his internal state. And I think there's just so much to talk about with what he does with the music and sound, which were, especially sound, was a really kind of neglected part of the craft in this era, unfortunately. Music as well.
Like I kind of mentioned in my intro, I just see this film as like every kind of window or screen is just its own story that's going on, and I think it kind of all kind of culminates in a big reflection on his character and everything in his life, every aspect of it, and it's crazy once you think about it in kind of that light and kind of rewatching it, how kind of genius this film is really. But yeah, his relationship with Grace Kelly, I think, is explored brilliantly, and we kind of see it evolve with the neighbors as the film kind of continues. And obviously, kind of one of the ending shots is we get that, I can't remember who is she, like an opera singer, the one kind of over, she has that, actually we see a lot of kind of men in her house sometimes. And then she's like really happy to see some guy walk in, and she hugs him at the end of the film. I think that's very reflective on kind of his character almost. But even the guy he's observing mainly in the film, I think, is almost a reflection on himself as well, and kind of his curiosity. But yeah, it's such a brilliant way to look at a film and to present a film, especially. But yeah, way ahead of his time. Crazy good.
Should we head into our intermission? Let's do our last 5 watches first, and you'll give us some time for maybe some questions.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go first. Couple of honorable mentions for my rewatches. I saw Blue Velvet in cinemas a couple weeks ago. That was pretty incredible. I'm seeing Fire Walk with Me tomorrow as well, which is going to be absolutely insane. I'm so excited for that.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah. And I rewatched Melancholia as well, which is something just clicked for me on that second watch. Is absolute masterpiece. I love that film so much. Unbelievable. But my top 5 first time watches of the past 2 weeks. At number 5, I have Steve McQueen's Hunger. Really that came massive surprise. And I think Alex, you've seen it as well. I did not realize Steve McQueen, like, I'd watched 12 Years Later, thought that was really great, but like this was incredible. Just so much directional source. I love the kind of stance this film takes between like the brutality of the prisoner's face and like what kind of the impact had on the guards. That was really great. Just gorgeous images and little to no dialogue. And we've been talking about directors holding on to there is a 17-minute 2-shot in this film, and it is incredible. It just doesn't cut. Just truly director who understands how to hold on to an image and the importance of actors and their chemistry, and it's an incredible film. And Michael Fassbender is still one of my favorite actors. Yeah, great performance. I also watched Midnight Cowboy with John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. Film I've been meaning to watch for ages and ages. I thought that was absolutely incredible. Just really sad kind of depiction on the American dream, and there's a real visual whiplash in this film with such kind of bright, vibrant night times, and there's just a real kind of gray tone kind of going over everything, and it's just I really love the contrast between the two, and it's quite tragic. There's a big sense of poignancy and just characters still feeling hope when there isn't really none, and thought the ending was really incredible. Absolutely love that film, but would highly recommend it. Number 3, I went for Robert Altman's The Player. I talked briefly about this on last week's podcast. Just an incredibly funny and ridiculously effective film with one of the best uses of meta commentary ever. It opens with an 8-minute tracking shot, which is how you know it's going to be an incredible film, and it jokes about tracking shots in that tracking shot. It's just so funny, and I love Robert Altman to bits. Yeah, another one everyone should check out. Really underrated film. At number 2, I have Le Cercle Rouge. Jean-Pierre Melville, obviously directed Les Samurai with the late Alain Delon, lead this film. Some really, really great performances in this film. Just such a cold film. Melville has that kind of really cold, bleak visual style that I really like. That kind of like slightly blue tone to his lighting. I think this film features one of the greatest heist sequences I've ever seen. There's like a 20-minute heist sequence and not one bit of dialogue is spoken, and it is so effective, and it's absolutely brilliant. Would highly recommend that. But number 1 for the best film, I have my best first time watch film in the past 2 weeks. I have gone for Eric Romer's The Green Ray. I've been meaning to watch this film for absolutely ages, and this film was just absolutely blew me away. Just really, really great symbolic journey of detachment and difficulties of finding love. We're kind of moving from place to place with their kind of lead character. I think this film challenges just so many different lifestyles, and I was just so. Romer's filmmaking is really delicate, and it is quite sad. The ending, just like the perfect metaphorical cherry on top for me. But yeah, just really great film on perspective. And yeah, I will be watching more of Eric Romer's films because they seem to be absolutely incredible. But yeah, The Green Ray, really, really, really love that film. That is my top 5.
Much better than your last top 5.
Am I going next, or do you want to go?
Up to you.
Yep.
I've had a weird month of watching movies. Honestly, I got like a handful of first watches for like the whole month, so I've really not got a lot to pick from here. I've just been rewatching a bunch of stuff, mainly because of the Alien rewatch, the Spider-Man re-releases in theaters, and then just rewatching other stuff for other podcasts. I've not got that many first watches. Honorable mention, I finally seen Spider-Man 3 in theaters, completed the trilogy.
So did
I will
I.
not be going to see TASM or probably the MCU films. So yeah, that's probably it completed for Spider-Man in theaters.
See TASM 2 though. So peak in theater. That's bored.
I won't
Attack
be
of the
wasting my
Clones
time
is
on that
playing
one.
here this
Probably.
weekend. I want to go and see that.
Yeah, I'm also thinking of going to see that. I'm seeing a Terminator double feature tomorrow, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, so that'll be great.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous I'm missing that.
But I've also got some rewatches in here, but my first one is a first watch, my number 5. It's The Fifth Element, which I think this has got to have influenced the prequels a bit, at least. This came out like 2 years before episode 1, and it's like almost like Blade Runner-y, but it's also got like some of the digital world of the prequels. So I think it's got to have influenced it at least a bit. I think this was a really good blend of like practical effects and visual effects, and Bruce Willis was great. Yeah, I can kind of see why it's like a cult classic. I know a lot of people recently have not been liking it, so that's why I went and rewatched it, or not watched it for the first time. I know Alex doesn't like it actually.
I think I'd like it
you're
more on a
half.
rewatch. It was a very long time ago I saw it, so I don't think my rating's that like. I probably like it a lot more today.
I give that a 3.5. And then my number 4 was a recommendation by Oscar. It was Melancholia. After you gave it a 5-star, I had to go and check it out. I think this is probably my favorite Lars von Trier film. It's like that opening sequence where it's like a moving painting, and I love so much when he does that in his films. They done it in Antichrist and the House that Jack built. At least from my seen, it is so good.
It's
probably
crazy.
Kirsten Dunst's best performance as well.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films of the century.
Yeah, just a great film. Definitely check it out. It's probably the least weird Von Trier film as well that I've seen. At least it doesn't get nearly as freaky as a lot of his films. Yeah, I give that high 4-star.
I think like it doesn't have like his like, I guess, trait. I think it has all these trademark qualities, but like toned down, because there's kind of like scenes that are fairly sexual, and I think there's a lot explored in that. If Alex ever gets around to watching it, I'd love to do an episode on it. I think it's an unbelievable film. But yeah, I love that film so much.
Yeah,
Best
he's an
disaster film
interesting
ever.
guy.
Well,
Yeah, maybe.
Alex, have you seen any Last One Trier?
I have not. I would love to see them if they get screened in theaters. I will definitely be going, but I haven't seen anything as of right now.
Interesting guy.
I'm
To
annoyed
say
because I
the
think I
least.
missed a screening of this like a couple of months ago in theaters. I'm annoyed I didn't go to it. But yeah, that's my number 4. My number 3 was I happened to it wasn't even in preparation for the podcast, but I happened to rewatch a couple of Hitchcock films. Spellbound was on TV, so I just randomly watched it. It was a rewatch, which has Ingrid Bergman, which is another one of his kind of like, I don't know if you've been enough to call her a Hitchcock girl, but was she in 2 films? She was in this and
Notorious.
yeah, just a great actress, and Gregory Peck is great in this as well. This is really experimental. Even like 9 years before Rear Window. Some of the imagery in this is amazing. There's a surrealism dream in it, and it's so cool. It's crazy for the 1945 that it came out. So yeah, if you want to see Hitchcock get even weirder with his camera tricks, go and watch that. My number 2. This is following on from my Alien rewatch. I rewatched the prequels and they went up. And I also rewatched Aliens because James Cameron just released a 4K for it. So I picked it up. I don't get why people even like this gets too much hate almost, even though it's like also acclaimed as like one of the best films of all time by like some people. I think it's very close to Alien in my opinion. It's definitely 1 and 2. There's like not even a discussion to be had about that. It's just the best practical effects of all time, possibly. It's not. It's maybe the best practical effects use of all time.
Prometheus are clear of aliens.
That's silly.
That's not silly. It's true.
Yeah, just it's actually a great 4K, even though Cameron has screwed up a couple of his releases recently. But yeah, I think people should definitely check out the director's cut of that if you haven't, because it changes the film. Great film. That actually entered my top 100 after rewatching it as well. So I really love that one. And then my number 1 watch of the month is seeing Pulp Fiction in theaters last week. Just as my second Tarantino in theaters after Once Upon a Time in the Hollywood. Just one of the greatest American films ever made. The dialogue, or Tarantino's dialogue, is always top notch. Like we were talking about last week, he's one of the best writers of all time. And it's exactly why he is one of the greatest directors of all time. There's so many scenes in this that are just iconic, like Travolta and Furman dancing. That whole scene is iconic. Yeah, that's one of my favorite films of all time, honestly. So yeah, I give that a 5, and that's my watches of the month.
Nice. Rapid fire, few honorable mentions. Watch Hitchcock's The Lodger. It was his last silent film, another great 1927 film. Hitchcock doing pure cinema. And yeah, it's incredible. Highly recommend that for Hitchcock fans. I rewatched in theaters the other Ingrid Bergman Hitchcock film, Notorious, which I liked it on a first watch, didn't really like, nothing special. And on a rewatch, really realized what a great film that is. Dynamite performances for both of them, especially Ingrid Bergman. Definitely recommend checking that out. So much style.
I need to rewatch that one.
Yeah, it's great. Rewatch Il Bidone from Fellini, the kind of underrated Fellini film. Rewatch Ghost in the Shell, which is I'm not a huge anime guy, but in this I refuse to believe anyone understands the plot of this movie. But it's fucking awesome. The images are sick, the sound, the music are sick, and I can't look at The Matrix the same way after seeing it because it clearly had a huge influence on it. Number one honorable mention that I want to talk about is Secret Sunshine, which is a film from Lee Chang-dong, a Korean filmmaker. This was such an interesting, deep, and multiple layered character study. It was about a character who goes through, some, I don't want to say too much, but this is such a roller coaster of a character study, which explores so many deep ideas. And it's really hard to say much about it without spoiling, but really, really interesting film. Way exceeded my expectations. Highly recommend it. Probably will go up to 5 on a rewatch, and probably should be a 5 right now. The more I think about it, incredible film. My number 5, my only first watch on my top 5, which is Neo the Maestro, which is a documentary. I'm not going to be including anything I watched as preparation. So like no Leone films or like Rear Window. I'm not counting any of them on this list because we've discussed them all in this episode of The Last. But Neo the Maestro is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. Someone asked on Discord recently what's a movie we haven't stopped thinking about recently, and this is that for me. It's just such a great detailed journey through the life of one of my favorite artists and one of the greatest musicians in the history of the craft of music. And I cannot recommend it enough. It's on Amazon Prime in America. It's just such an incredible documentary. And I'm glad that it got made before he passed away because it was released just shortly after. Number 4, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I don't know why Star Trek seems to have disappeared from conversation and popular culture. And especially how big like franchises and like nerd culture is right now. For some reason, Star Trek seems to have become forgotten when I think it's easily one of the greatest franchises of all time, with Wrath of Khan being the best. Did you just call Star Trek mid? I don't think you've even seen them. I'm pretty sure you've
not even seen it. I've not seen it.
That's exactly what
I've seen J.J. Abrams' first film.
I'm talking about the OG Star Treks, though.
Yeah.
This is it's a shame that they've disappeared because it's one of the best franchises of all time and used to be neck and neck like a conversation with Star Wars and seems to have disappeared from most conversation, but highly recommend people check out those movies, the OG ones. I've only seen the first Abrams and haven't rewatched it in a while, so can't comment on that, but Star Trek Wrath of Khan, absolutely incredible film. Number 3, which actually I'm going to swap. Number 3, I'm going to go with one of the greatest street movies ever made, La Haine, out of France. It's just top tier, elite, best shot movies ever made. One of the best looking films, one of the best scripts ever made, with being such like a film that defies so many conventions narratively and is really a film about waiting. Just the atmosphere that they're able to create in that film is so authentic and real and just all about its perfect slice of life filmmaking, immersing you in this world with such great characters who are so well written. And there's so much I could say about that film. It's one of my favorites ever. All 3, my top 3 are 3 of my absolute favorites ever. Number 2.
Did I see that you skipped the Batman screening for the La Haine?
I unfortunately did. I really screwed up. I didn't go to the earlier screening because I never put the Batman in my calendar. So because I saw the Batman 6 times in theaters during its run. I've never seen La Haine in theaters, so I did choose it.
That's fair.
One. It was a great watch, so I'm not like regretting it, but like I'm very disappointed that I didn't plan ahead better to see both.
I don't think we get it until the end of September.
Yeah.
Maybe I got to fly to the UK then.
I get to see Batman Forever and Batman and Robin in cinemas next month.
Yeah.
That's fucking awesome. Peak movies. I actually had to miss Batman and Robin last week for a fantasy football draft. I was pretty disappointed about it.
We're not getting Batman Returns though, which is criminal.
That is criminal.
Which sucks.
Yeah, that sucked. Number 2, I have the best film of one of the greatest filmmakers in history, and that is Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. I'm not going to say too much because it's so easy to just go on a tangent of how brilliant this film is, but it's a culmination of everything in Kubrick's career. It's a mastery of every technique of filmmaking. It's the ultimate mind fuck and mind game of a movie. And it's just the ultimate psychological movie in the way Kubrick is just able to place images in your head, place images in the mind of the characters as well as the audience, and just manipulate your entire psychology is truly incredible. He was probably the smartest intellectual filmmaker of all time, and it's on full display here. He knew that his life was coming to an end when he made this, and it's just, I think it's his absolute magnum opus. it gets better and better in so many ways on every rewatch. It's just such an incredible film.
It's so good in cinemas.
Maybe should even be my
best,
film of the week, but my
It
number
might
one.
be his best film. No,
I think it is.
2001
Not
takes that
even-
crown. Yeah,
It's so
I think
even-
it's his second best film.
I'll
It's
put it
not
this
even
way,
top three.
I don't know how you pick because they're both fucking perfect. Like they're both
Yeah.
legitimate perfect movies. So how do you pick?
I think 2001
It's crazy.
and
The film
Shining
that got him
are like
killed.
I'll kind of level above the rest.
The Shining's like Shining and Barry Lyndon too are like they're like pretty much perfect movies too. So it's like how do you even pick? Like I think those four are just incredible. They would be number one on just about every other filmmaker's filmography. It's so tough to pick between them. But Eyes Wide Shut is an absolute masterpiece. I can't wait till we eventually do an episode on it because it's such a
Yeah, stay tuned. Should be soon, probably in the next month, couple weeks.
Yep.
Very, very
So I'll
excited for that.
see.
I have a lot to say.
I'll save the rest of my thoughts for that. But my number one film, arguably the best ending in film history, a film I just can't get enough of. I'll see it anytime it's playing, and that is Federico Fellini's Knights of Cabiria. Just one of the best character journeys of any film ever. The score is incredible. It's Messina's performance is the best of her legendary career. It's one of the best performances ever. And the ending is just so insanely powerful. And yeah, it's just another absolute masterpiece of a film. But I think Q&A, we only have one question this week, and it's a bit of an odd question, but question from Cash the Butcher. And it is, why do movies always show boobs but not cock? Where's the cock representation?
We just spent 40 minutes talking about the greatest
I was
cock.
about to say we're doing
Damn
an episode
right.
on cock right now. We're doing an episode on the
You
second
should have
best
saved
cock
this
of
for
all
the
time.
Eyes Wide Shut episode. That would have been perfect.
Well, I think it is fitting that we're doing an episode on the cock, though. The cock himself. Not a cock, the cock.
Oh dear, that's an interesting question.
It's a very interesting question. We're currently covering the second best cock of all time, so I think there's the representation for it
First
right
best.
This is getting age restricted.
100%.
Oh dear.
But go check out his podcast, the Film Scoop podcast. If you haven't, they're a very entertaining podcast, and I'm sure they've probably covered this topic at some point. So if you're more interested as to why boobs get more representation than cock, check out the Film Scoop podcast. But let's get back into Rear Window, and I think perfect segue would be to talk a bit about the cock himself, Mr. Alfred Hitchcock, and one of the best directors ever, as we've talked about. And I think he was famous for his thrillers, and this is definitely a Hitchcock thriller, but not his standard thriller. It wasn't like, North by Northwest, which was a film he kind of remade multiple times. The Man Who Knew Too Much, which he remade multiple times, where it's kind of this ordinary person kind of thrown into these extraordinary circumstances. This is just a fresh, different type of suspense thriller. And I think one thing I love about Hitchcock so much is that his philosophy is so different from a lot of other filmmakers, especially today and of his time, where he experimented with how to tell the story constantly. And he said in an interview with the great Francois Truffaut that he regrets not experimenting with narrative, and his films always had the same narrative structure to a degree, and he wishes he'd experimented with that more. And I think that's because he just never really cared about narrative. And I think, everyone always says like story, and I always think like that's not really, at least for me, what it's about. I think what's more important than the story is how you tell it. And Hitchcock never really talks about the story. It's always about the storytelling and the technique that he talks about, which is why he's the ultimate craft director and director's director, where we'll get into a bit his views on actors, but like his view on is like Steven Spielberg will adapt his film to the story, where the story is adapted to the type of filmmaking or technique that Hitchcock wants to use. He doesn't adapt his film to the story. And it's very much about kind of technique first, which I really think is really refreshing from him, that it's not always everything serving the story, and the story is actually serving the storytelling for a Hitchcock film. And it's all about, okay, I want to try this technique out. I want to try a film that doesn't cut. I want to try a film where the camera's in one room for the entire film. Write me a story or find me a story that will suit that. And I think it's all about the audience's experience for him. And he cares. I always talk more about the experience of the story, the way you experience the story more than the story itself. And I think that's always what Hitchcock seems to talk about, which is another thing I really love about his filmmaking so much, is his care for, because I always say the job isn't always to tell a story, it's to create an emotional response. And everything, the driving force of Hitchcock's style is always about creating an emotional response.
That goes back to like his the pure cinema thing, where film is a different medium from everything else, where you can do stuff that's completely different. You can't do in a play or a book. You can get plot from all those, but you can do stuff in a visual medium that you can't do with those. Every scene, it's not like an accident why Lisa is wearing certain colors or certain pieces of clothing. Like it does connect to the other people. The Miss Lonely who wears the green right before you see Grace Kelly walk in with a green dress, or there's the blonde who is similarly looking like Grace Kelly across the courtyard. Like there's all these elements of how he sets up everything in his film, and there's a reason behind all of it, and it all goes back to the fact that it's a visual medium and that he puts the effort into doing everything to make the best use of that medium in it, because you can't do it, and you can't tell that type of story in any other type of medium like he does.
I think I don't normally like to comment on like the morality of characters. Like that's not the way I like to comment on film, but I do think that Jimmy Stewart was to a degree wrong in the film. For like, it is kind of, I do think he's wrong to really like kind of be like a peeping Tom in this way. And I think the moment where we really become conscious of that is when we're looking. It's, you see Lonely Heart always at a high angle, which often is used to make a character look more vulnerable. And not only is he being like a peeping Tom to like in watching this kind of isolated weak moment of hers, but there's also Venetian blinds there, and we normally see like an open window at the other characters and can look directly at them. But those Venetian blinds really remind us that like we're looking at a private moment that we're not supposed to be looking at. And I think that right there, like it's even though it's not a fourth wall break like we see in some other areas of the film, it's really reminding us that of this kind of separation and distance between the personal life of this character. And it's clearly like it's not like her window's open and she doesn't want to be looked at here and doesn't want people to see her in this kind of vulnerable moment that's supposed to be something she's experiencing in her own private life, in the privacy of her own home. So I think that's where we kind of become really aware of kind of and start questioning whether or not it's because we're in Jimmy Stewart's shoes. We're kind of watching and being a peeping Tom on these people along with him. We're in his perspective, and we start questioning both him and ourselves. And I do think, even though like I kind of like don't think it's the right thing to do, I think this is one of the great things about cinema is when you have characters, it's not so clear cut right and wrong. And there is, there's some good, there's some bad, there's some relatability, there's a lot. It's a very mixed bag. And I think in classic Hollywood, I anyone who says that there's no, questioning morally gray characters in classic Hollywood just hasn't seen enough films. But there is a tendency in a lot of them to kind of have clear cut good and bad. And I don't think people are ever really that simple. And I think it's just another great element of Hitchcock that even the hero that we're following, it's a little bit more of a gray area there. And I think, even though like we're kind of looking into these people's lives, and kind of like what I said about watching, it's like we're watching a bunch of different TV shows. People often will watch a movie or a show or whatever it is, or even if it's social media, whatever, and they project things about their own life onto people, whether it's, someone they want to be, someone who there are certain things they don't like and they project that onto someone, or insecurities about themselves that they call out in the other person that they want on themselves. Like there's a lot of different ways that people tend to project their things about their own life onto entertainment or movies, TV, content creation, whatever it might be. And I think Hitchcock brilliantly makes every single person around them be a reflection, like Oscar said, of the core conflicts between Jimmy Stewart's character and Grace Kelly, where it's really at its core a story about it doesn't want to get married to a woman and doesn't want to settle down and kind of lose the sense of adventure. It's only once Lisa, played by Grace Kelly, is on the other side, and now she's essentially on the movie screen, that he's interested in her and sees her as adventurous and sees her as someone who he wants to be with. But there's 4 women who we see across the courtyard, and all 4 of them reflect the relationship in different ways. Where first we have the newlyweds, which is an example of, this happily married life. And right away, we kind of that curtain shut because that's not what Jimmy Stewart wants. So right away, that kind of option is closed. Then we have Miss Torso, who is kind of like how Jimmy Stewart sees Grace Kelly, and Grace Kelly's projection of how she sees Miss Torso, who is a woman neither of them know, really kind of shows their different viewpoints on the characters. They both project different ideas onto her based on their own personal life, where basically Jimmy Stewart thinks like, oh, she just entertains different guys all day, and Grace Kelly thinks like, no, there's like one man that she really is in love with. So they both like project differently onto the same character, reflect their feelings towards each other essentially. And then you have Miss Lonely Heart, who really does, in a lot of ways, is a projection of Grace Kelly, and her longing to be married and her longing to feel like Jeff is in love with her back, where even though it's obviously there's a lot of differences between the characters, she in a lot of ways represents how Lisa's character feels. And in a lot of ways, the composer reflects Jeff, played by Jimmy Stewart, in a lot of ways, where he's unable to finish his composition and there's like something missing in his life and he can't figure out what that is. And only when the composer and Mrs. Lonely Heart are together he's able to finish his composition, which is called Lisa. And ultimately they both have kind of found what they were both lacking. And then the 4th projection is, of course, the Thornwalds, and they are the opposite of the newlyweds. They're the unhappy couple, and what L.B. Jeffries sees as marriage is going to be, with a lot of nagging and a lot of fighting and a lot of things he doesn't want to deal with. And it's basically a projection of his idea of a bad marriage. And only when the Thornwalds are out, they've moved out of the apartment, can the composition be finished and can they be together happily again. So I think the way it's everything just is a reflection and a projection of the 2 of them is just another subtle, brilliant, like we talked about in the beginning, where you might not notice every little brilliant thing Hitchcock does, but the reason why films like these get so much praise is the precision of these details. And when you rewatch and can hear what's being said in the dialogue and why that's being chosen to be heard as we're looking at certain images, is really just such precise craftsmanship and detail, and gives this film such high rewatch value for every watch, where it's not just entertaining for the thrill of the uncertainty and curiosity when you watch it for a first time, but when you go back and just keep picking up on all the layers that Hitchcock created for us.
It's so good, man. It's so good.
I love the reaction that Jeff has when they're talking about the unhappy couple across to their left, and it's something Lisa says like, "I wonder what's going on behind there," and he just says no comment, and it's just the small like little like looks of reaction shots that Hitchcock has with him are so funny, the way James Stewart delivers them. There's also I love the fact that the central idea is their romance and like everything around it. It's kind of juxtaposed to their relationship, everything that's happening outside the window. There's even like there's like a happy couple with children like on the top right as well, that like you get like maybe 1 or 2 glimpses of them for the film, but like there's definitely an active view of just focusing on the couples that are kind of struggling romantically, or like Jeff doesn't really want to consider the possibility of being happy and settling down like they have, like, and you just see them with their child on the veranda like maybe once or twice. And I just love the way that then his negative view of marriage, like you've been saying, Alex, is just blended into everything around this film, and the small glimpses you get into the lives of all the people around them. You mentioned when he looks at the woman having dinner by herself. I like that he feels sympathy for her, but at the same time, like Lisa is preparing dinner behind him for him, and he has no idea of really the effort that she's putting in to really be in a relationship with him. And then you end up getting Lisa's perspective on Mrs. Torst, like you were saying about the men coming over, and the way that she sees it as differently as waiting on her true love to return for war, like she's kind of waiting for Jeff to truly acknowledge like her love for him. And just Grace Kelly in this movie is amazing. Jeff is the craziest man in all of cinema because he doesn't have much interest in Grace Kelly at the start of this film. But
Yeah,
the
that's crazy.
introduction, I know, the introduction of her at the start is amazing. That close up that you get when she's going in for the kiss, and then the shadow over James Stewart's face is
Very
just
good.
so good. And funnily enough, that was lost. I think that was a lost scene until like the 80s, when they restored it. It was
Oh
just a
yeah, I
lost scene
heard
from the
about that.
movie.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
it's
Yeah,
crazy because it's one of the best shots in the movie.
Do you
Yeah,
want to
I-
go into mission?
Yeah.
I was gonna say I can't help but feel like Grace Kelly is a little bit miscast because it's like, I mean, listen, her performance is incredible. Like she gives a dynamite performance. Like the curiosity and the way she stares, like the excitement and the way she breathes, like when she's a participant, like she nails every emotional beat of the role perfectly. But like the movie is about a guy who doesn't want to get married to the girl he's with. And like, I get it, bro. Like, I don't want to get married either, but this is Grace Kelly, bro. Like, you're telling me that like it's just so hard to believe that there is a guy who doesn't want to marry Grace Kelly. Her performance is perfect. And like
It makes it even
understand
better.
not wanting to get married, but like if there's any woman who is gonna like switch a guy's philosophy there, it's Grace Kelly.
Mhm.
True. Oh, that's funny. Oh dear.
But that's what the brilliance of James Stewart is, I think, as well. He's so popular because he is kind of that really like character actor that's so relatable to everybody, and that's what Hitchcock's aiming to do here, is kind of put you into the perspective of Jeff. And I think you're probably lying, even though it is morally wrong, that you wouldn't do the same thing as him if you're in that situation, stuck in a wheelchair for weeks.
Yeah, and I think we got to talk briefly just about his approach to directing actors because it's very not common today. And like I said, his films are not made 3 times. It's pre-planned. And a lot of people today will just shoot a bunch of coverage of the actors and mold the editing to the performance. It's like, okay, like we're using this shot because this performance is good. So hold there till the performance gets bad. Then we change to this angle and get the best little, it's a patch job around the performance the way a lot of people, their approach to filmmaking today. And Hitchcock really never molded to the editing. It was always about what was the visual storytelling he wanted. He uses the Montgomery Cliff example where he said, I need you to look up. And Cliff said, well, I don't think my character would look up. And Hitchcock said, well, I want you to look up. And of course, the famous quote we referred to actors as cattle, or that they should be treated like cattle. And at the end of the day, Hitchcock was a my way or the highway director. And he understood star power and what a star can do for your film. And especially with winning the audiences, making the audience like the characters when you have an actor who just is likable and charming themselves. But he really didn't care for the craft of acting. They were more like models to him. And they were definitely more like just kind of go here, do this, like more of like puppet type of directing. And, you know, I think like every director has a different style, and that's his. I do think it's interesting that he had more care for the crew than he did for the actors, because it's like normally the crew gets treated like an afterthought, where the actors are treated as, you know, like the top priority. So it is interesting, that kind of reversal that he had. So it's not always the approach that I think should be taken, but that was his approach.
I really like how he almost, well, we're talking about how he had like the Hitchcock girls or like James Stewart, where he always had he had actors that he returned to and had done a lot of projects with them. I know he had a good relationship with James Stewart, and it's nice to know that he was kind of the same personality off screen that he was in front of it. Yeah, their relationship seemed really good. I seen there was a moment in the documentary where they said that it was the only time that Hitchcock seemed happy was when he was on set with James Stewart. Uh,
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people, like a lot of the older Hollywood films, where you know, some people say like that the old Hollywood films don't have like good female characters. And I think that couldn't be more wrong. I think in that era, you have some of the greatest actresses in the history of cinema. Like, you just go down the list: Barbara Stanwyck, Ingrid Bergman, Joan Blondell. Like, there's so many incredibly talented actresses of this era. But I think that there is some films. There's a lot of great ones. It's not like this is an outlier, but he does such a great job of making the love interest of the film not just like a side character, but really like an active participant in the film, who he just does such a great job of making her a participant. Where, I think it really is summed up great is the one scene where Grace Kelly wears green. And that's important because this is a scene about Jimmy Stewart's lack of interest in her. And ultimately in the final shot, she'll be wearing red, which is the opposite of the color spectrum from green. But this scene really is all about her winning his interest. So she starts off, she's wearing the green, and he makes a comment about her hair. But before she's even finished speaking, his interest has been cut off by his interest in Thornwall. And it just shows kind of his lack of interest in her. And then only when she starts looking at Thornwall across as well and starts really bringing like the female perspective on it, like every woman has a favorite handbag, she would never leave her handbag. And she starts filling in those clues that Jeff, from his male perspective, wouldn't think of. And now she is essentially a participant and an ally in the film. And that's where he starts winning over her interest. And then we get the shot where it's one of the more well-known shots of the film, where Grace Kelly's laying at the bottom of the frame. You have Jimmy Stewart's head in the top left of the frame, diagonally looking down at her with interest now. She went from being behind him as he looks across the way to now being in front of him and actually what he's interested in. So I think the way Hitchcock evolves that scene, where she kind of first wins his interest, and then she becomes like an adventure. Like I said, she becomes on the movie screen essentially, where now she is an active participant. And I think that's one of the things that makes her one of the greatest female characters of the era, is that she's not just a kind of passive supporting role or like the standard rom-com type of female character. She really is an adventurous, active participant, which I think makes her this is why I think this is such a great film as an introduction to the 50s for everyone, especially like women as well, where it has like a really great female character for the women watching to kind of project themselves onto and like go into her point of view for the film, because she's such a fun, adventurous character to kind of follow on screen. And yeah, the evolution as well, from the wearing green to wearing red, I think all of that is great as well. And yeah, like I said, there's miscasting possibilities in terms of Jeff's point of view, but the way what she brings to the performance is one of the best of the era.
Yeah, the close-ups do really stand out. Like there's the one when Lisa comes back into the apartment and there's a close-up of James Stewart, and it's when you finally realize that he is starting to get closer to her after he sees her like be more adventurous.
I think his style is, people think of like the Hitchcock style film, but I think, and this is part of why I think old films matter, is that even though Hitchcock had such a unique style for his time, especially, was so kind of different and groundbreaking, he was always kind of merging what came before him. Like, even though he had a new, fresh style, it was fresh because he combined different things with different styles, where he was the first one to really combine like Russian montage theory. Like the Russians at the time were really big on experimenting with cutting and the juxtaposition of two images, how that will create a single idea. Like I said, the example of the baby versus the girl in the bikini, and just really like Russian montage theory was such a foundation of his style, mixed with kind of the long takes that the French were doing, which you see plenty of long takes in Hitchcock films, and along with German expressionist lighting and German suspense, because the Germans, Hitchcock's first two silent films were both in Germany. And the Germans in the silent era were really the pioneers of horror and suspense and kind of like expressionist lighting and these kind of darker lightings and, morally gray characters and unreliable narrators. All of these things were coming out of the German system of the early silent films. And Hitchcock made his first two films in Germany. So you really see him kind of combine the philosophies and styles of different countries into the Hitchcock style with, of course, like we said, such precision. Like his films were not made three times. A lot of people have the philosophy that a movie's made three times, once in the writing, once in production, and once in the editing, which Chris Nolan 100%, you can tell, takes that approach. Like And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of preference. But Nolan, you could tell a Nolan film is he writes it first, then he decides how to shoot it, and then he kind of remakes it in the editing room. Where Hitchcock had the way he wanted it to look and be edited and the cutting and everything pre-planned ahead of time. And his cutting and editing speed is such a part of his style where his adjustments in how long he's holding the shots, how frequently he's cutting, the speed in which he's cutting, all of that is really, like I said, all about the audience's experience and the way he's adjusting that speed to affect our experience and the way that we feel about things. And he was always like constantly testing himself, trying new things. But he, one other really strong element of his filmmaking is the way he saved his close-ups. And like we said, he's a purely visual filmmaker. He even said to Truffaut that the worst thing a writer could ever say is we'll cover that in dialogue. He was all about the image and understood kind of the distance from the actor, from the camera, and the impact that can have. You always have to pay attention to where Hitchcock uses a close-up because he saves them for important and impactful moments. Like there's certain things where if you just look at the picture of a Hitchcock film, you'll learn and notice things that you wouldn't otherwise if you're just someone who's listening to the dialogue because he's explaining so much to you visually. And I think things like where he uses a close up, what specific items he chooses to give an insert shot for, like the fact that the MacGuffin is a wedding ring, symbolic of the marriage conflict between Lisa and Jeff, and the way he's able to just precisely use certain shot distances as well. You just have to pay attention to every image of his films because he's so committed to that, and it's just the ultimate like very few directors love cinema like Hitchcock, and it just bleeds through in every one of his films, his love for this art form, craft, and experience. But also, I think we got to talk about who I think is, and Hitchcock has even said is might be his most important collaborator, costume designer Edith Head, who Paramount's the best studio of classic Hollywood. I don't care what anyone says. In my opinion, Paramount was always the best studio. You have Hitchcock and Wilder on top just to start. I think they were the best studio of the era. And their movies had so much style, whether it's the Hitchcock movies or just the Audrey Hepburn films, whether it's, Funny Face, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Sabrina, all those films. And most of these iconic fashion films of the era really came from Paramount because of Edith Head, who is easily the greatest costume designer in the history of cinema and who Hitchcock considered one of his most important collaborators. And they would start collaborating before the picture was even casted, before they even knew who was going to be wearing the clothes. They were talking about what the wardrobe would be. And she says Hitchcock always gave her very specific, detailed costume notes whenever she would get the script. And, when Hitchcock's defining traits, his suspense, his point of view, but also his style. He is probably like one of the most stylish Hollywood directors of any director ever. Of course, you have people like Carway and Fellini overseas who had that sense of style, but Hitchcock's style is right up there. Like, it's just incredible the way he's the perfect director for Technicolor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dresses Grace Kelly wears in this they're so good. It's almost like the way she walks in the room is almost like she's doing like a fashion show, just showing off the dresses that Edith Head's made for her. And yeah, her like career is insane. Like you're saying, all the work that she's done with Wilder, like John Wayne, Hitchcock. There's so much, like even just other films from the 50s that have that. I mean, there's like White Christmas that she worked on. The costume in that is probably the highlight of the film. That movie looks gorgeous as well in Technicolor. Yeah, it's hard to screw up a Technicolor film. It just looks so good.
Yeah, like you said, they're even like models, and like the way Grace Kelly just in that first introduction after the close-up walks around the room, turns the lights on one by one. It kind of like reveal going from a close-up to a long shot to like reveal that dress to us. So once again, treating the actors kind of like models. So that pretty much wraps up our episode. Please let us know, what is your favorite Alfred Hitchcock film? What's your favorite suspense thriller? And what is your favorite film of the 1950s? Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. And we'll be back again next week with another great episode. Thank you for watching.